which is fairly common in the UK to some degree. You've got a Romanian hairdresser working in Bucharest, which there are incredibly poor areas of Bucharest still, and she sees an advert on Facebook to come and work in Northampton. And she can basically quadruple 5-6 times her wages what she's working in Bucharest. So they're offering accommodation and to go with the job as well, which all sounds fairly reasonable. So she agrees to it. She's got a bit of money behind her, so she arranges her travel to Northampton, flies into Luton, catches a bus up to Northampton bus station, and then she's met by her new employers, who take her to a property in Northampton. And when she gets there, they give her the news that actually there is no hairdressing job. There was never no hairdressing job. And she's now in debt because they've made this arrangement of the accommodation, and they picked her up from Northampton. And it really doesn't matter how much that debt is, but it's more than what she can obviously just pay out now. So with regards to the legislation, the action, has she been recruited? Has she been transported? She has, because she's been picked up from the train station. Has she been harboured? Well, she's been taken to a property. So that part is met. The means, well, there could be some threats of violence, but clearly there's a deception. So that part's met. You only need one of these to do it. And then the purpose. The purpose is that they're going to exploit her. So it matters not that she's not actually even being exploited at the moment. The fact that that's what they're going to do means that that part of the human trafficking legislation is complete. So it is quite straightforward. The issue we have is we'll come on into the further down the slides, is that that female in that position, the first thing that she doesn't think of is, I'm a victim, I need to go and speak to the police, which we'll cover anyway. And then if you look across, you've got the slavery, servitude, forced labour. Again, you don't need an action on that, you just need the means and the purpose. So somebody is using force in order to exploit you, then we see that quite a bit. We've certainly come across it in the travelling fraternity, where people are block paving drives, cutting down trees, and that very labour intensive. There can be some sort of threats of violence. It's certainly incredibly low pay for doing that, but certainly threats of violence in order to work with foreign nationals in that. So we do come. So it's not difficult legislation. It is quite easy, and we are applying it more and more now in the police. Back to you, Nick, I think.
Yeah. So I've included a slide here, guys, just around some of the myths and our local context, really. So I think across the country, there's a feeling that people trafficking only relates to people who are brought in from overseas, or how they land into the UK itself. But we'll come on to reality in a second. And it only occurs in sort of large towns and cities. It's not an issue really we need to face ourselves with here in Northants. And actually, well, surely we just get reports and we can easily process them because people report this to us and we can pick it up and run with it fairly quickly. Unfortunately, in reality, it's very different to that. So I would suggest in Northants, they talk about slavery being a hidden crime type, and it very much is. Some of those more traditional crimes we're very good at identifying, whether that's by the public or police officers. But even though it's been in for 5 or 6 years now, we still struggle to get our head around the idea of someone being exploited and the psychological impact it has on them and the barriers it throws up in place. So I've mentioned there, we are a bit of a tip of the iceberg. There's so much that goes underreported, so much which isn't understood. We really struggle with a lack of intelligence. When we talk about some of our foreign nationals, we get very little intelligence come through from our traditional sort of processes around those groups. It's therefore very hard to understand what risk is presented and opportunities to try and tackle it. Whereas if you look at a more, say, a local drugs activity, we get so much reporting around that. There's so much other types of engagement from partners, etc., that we've got quite a rich intelligence picture. And this is where we struggle sometimes with the modern slavery side of things. They are linked to organised crime groups. We've got a number of organised crime groups that we've recognised and sort of mapped here within Northants. We've got groups at the moment over in Corby side who look like trafficking victims in from Lithuania and Romania, and then put them into employment, into housing, and again exploiting them financially. So they're going along with those early setups, setting up employment for them, setting up their bank accounts for them, taking control of those bank cards, and then actually completed further fraudulent activity and debt bondage and the victims even more. So again, they're entering this country with no contact support and very quickly heavy debt and have nowhere to turn to. So it's here in Northants. I think it's probably here to stay. I think John will probably agree, sort of year on year since we've been mapping and sort of understanding the sort of the data picture, it's continuously to grow, and actually it's quite widespread into other types of criminality. A lot of the county lines activity, when they're using vulnerable children or vulnerable adults, that is ultimately modern slavery straight away, and we should be investigating that and pursuing that as a primary offence. And I think sometimes when the police have fallen foul historically, is we've seen that as a drugs issue to tackle and not seeing the wider criminality and activity going on with it. And that's really why we're here today, guys, because I think we're realistic in the sense we've traditional methods that the police use to gather information doesn't seem to touch these types of groups. So we're keen to try and get everything that's out there sort of filtered into us, so we can sort of make a bit more of a richer picture.
Okay. Yeah, I'll crack on. So why does it happen? You know, we do live in a fairly affluent society. Certainly, you know, this side of Europe and France and Germany and that is incredibly poor in places. The further sort of west you go, certainly in Romania and Latvia and places like that, there's very poor towns. And everything else. Quite a lot of people want to come because they just want to better themselves, and we'll cover that more on the organised immigration crime. But whilst there's a demand for services and demand for labour, then there'll always be a supply of people, unfortunately. Those of you that drive cars and may have visited a hand car wash, we tend to find quite a lot of people being exploited through there. They're not all bad, but some of them are, because it's a very cash-driven society, and people that perhaps can't work legitimately end up working at car washes. So things like that. Just have when you go to a car wash, you know, does it look fairly well run, organised? People seem to have reasonable kit on, like perhaps wellies, as opposed to trainers with holes in that are soaking wet. That's all the sort of things we're looking at. I can tell you probably now, if I was to, because we do quite a bit of proactivity around it, if I went onto a couple of normal adult websites where you can visit a prostitute, I would say currently in Northampton, probably in Northampton town area, there's probably about 40 to 50 people currently advertising their services online at this moment. And there wouldn't be that sort of number if there wasn't a demand for that. So whilst there's demand, people continue to get exploited. Okay, there's 3 slides here. They're all fairly similar, so we'll go through them. But some signs and indicators. So these are sort of locations. Again, when you look at that list, there shouldn't be anything there where you think, well, that's unusual. And if you go back, you know, 20 odd years now, to Morecambe Bay and the cockle pickers that were all Vietnamese that all drowned when they were picking cockles because of the tide that came in, they were exploited by an organised crime group. So it goes around. I've covered a few on there: car washes, traveller sites. Quite a lot of ladies on the call today. If you go and get your nails done at a nail bar, again, typically Vietnamese type based, some of them. And again, we get people that are here unofficially, stroke illegally, that are working in nail bars. And obviously, if you are not working legally, then you will be exploited. And again, probably not for you, but something that we see a lot of is residential properties that are being turned into cannabis factories for cultivation of cannabis. But somebody needs to be there to water the plants, to manage the plants, make sure they grow and everything. And that can be clearly 1 or 2 people. that could be somebody that's got a vested interest in growing those plants and is going to make a lot of money out of it. Likewise, it could be somebody that's here illegally, and therefore that's either how they try and get out of their debt or how they try and earn some money in order to survive. So just basically keep your eyes open for when you're around these sort of things, because it is there in plain sight. Some of the indicators that somebody may be exploited: if they've got no identification on them, or they can't access it, or they give you a story that their employer has got it, I would suggest that is a sort of a bit of a red flag, because we do know that people keep hold of IDs and bank cards of other people in order to control them. We had a job fairly recently, probably within the last couple of months, where a 19-year-old Romanian lad went into a petrol station and called the police with the help of the petrol staff that were there. And he was saying that he's got nothing, all his belongings and his bank cards and his passport and that is being held by the person that he's staying with. We safeguarded him. We then went back to the house where he was staying to follow those sort of inquiries up, and lo and behold, the owner of the house, and it was a multi-occupancy house, an official multi-occupancy, but the owner of the house, underneath his pillow was this gentleman's ID card, bank card, and everything else that he sort of was important to him that he's owned. And that's purely a control method at the end of the day. You know, part as Nick sort of mentioned with the myths, it's not about locking people behind doors and only letting them out when you want them to go out to work. It's all the psychological and control of documents and things like that. Probably the other one that I'll touch on is dependent on others. It's really a gut feeling when you go and you have translation issues in properties. Is that person being really helpful because they're translating on behalf of this guy that you're interested in or this lady you're interested in, or are they actually translating because they want to control the conversation? And that's just a bit of a judgment call at the end of the day. We did a welfare check in a house in Corby based on what sort of Nick said with our organised crime group, because we had a report that people were being exploited in there. We went to the address, or uniformed police went to the address, and we were greeted at the address by a very polite person who could speak very good English, very helpful, showed the officers around the house and said, yeah, this is this is Bill and John in this room, they work at so and so. This is Maria and Jane in this room, they work at so and so. Everything's all right here, officer. And the officer said, yep, that's great, thank you very much for telling me all that. I now want to speak to the people individually to make sure that they're okay, at which point that guy's attitude changed and he tried to throw the officers out of the house, because at that point he was not in control. So that's just some of the indicators. And the last one, you flip through, Nick.
Should be there now.
Yeah. The last one is, and I'll only touch on this because Nick's going to do it a bit more on the next one. But probably the biggest thing is that they just don't understand they're a victim. All those sort of scenarios that I've talked to you about, they probably think that they've made a bit of a poor choice and got themselves into a bit of a hole, which they now need to try and get themselves out of. They certainly do not think about going towards police. We dealt many years ago with an English guy who was in his 50s. He was homeless. He was homeless before the travelling community were very gracious to him and gave him a job and a tent to live in. And he was living with those travellers for 5 years. And we stumbled across him. He hadn't been paid for 5 years. We safeguarded him and changed his life around. Spoke to him about 6 months after the ordeal. He was extremely grateful. But I did say to him, why didn't you just ask for help? Why didn't you just speak to the police. And he said, well, actually, they kept saying to me, go on, leave. If you don't like it, leave. Go away. Just bear in mind, as soon as you walk off this site, there's not going to be any accommodation. You can't come back. That's it. It's gone. So he had nothing. But he still felt that he could not go and ask for help. And that's an English guy who was born in Leicester, ended up in Northampton, but he's an English guy in his 50s and had some education behind him. So if he couldn't feel comfortable or knew that he could ask for help, certainly with police, then that's why we struggle probably with our foreign nationals as well, because of the barrier, and probably their police force is not quite the same as our police force when it comes to safeguarding and sort of trust, because there are corruption issues abroad as well.
Thanks, John. I think this carries on really, guys, from there. I think the biggest thing I would stress is, the people committing this are usually pretty switched on. They understand vulnerability in the sense of, who's vulnerable, and they make sure they pick their targets correctly, so that when, whether or not it's ourselves or partners, come across them, we're not getting a victim who's portrayed in the obvious sense of the word, and that's always difficult. No matter who you're going into and speaking with, we've all got our preconceived sort of ideas of a situation. We're all sort of built on experience, a lot of us, and sort of a gut feeling of how circumstances occur. But I think with slavery, they try to make the best of a bad situation. They try to sort of skewer their own picture as to what's happened to them, because it's distressing to think that you have been exploited to that degree. You've got no control over your own personal life, and therefore, as John's alluded to, victims won't see themselves as victims. Sometimes can be quite aggressive in nature, will not engage. So it's a very difficult place to start as a starting point to try and get a flavour for, is it occurring there. Distrust in authorities, we've mentioned again, more so maybe with those coming in from international seas, but even with locally as well is an issue. Changing of accounts, I know from a police perspective, a lot of our decision making sometimes is based upon uncooperative people or people who change in their accounts, and I suppose what we're asking for here is to look at that wider picture as to why that may be. Why is that person changing their account now? Is there a snippet of something they disclose which actually could be truthful, and we need to pull that thread a little bit more? And ultimately, they're extremely frightened. I mean, some of our victims from our OCGs in Corby have referenced being taken out to woods in Lithuania and Romania, threatened that family members back there will be killed, will be attacked. And it's very difficult then, I suppose, for them to bridge that gap without that level of control, and being able to assure their own sort of families or others, safety. One thing we've touched on here is, again, for those of you who will do public facing sort of visits or that engagement, is the alpha victim reference I've put there. An alpha victim, for those who don't know, is someone who maybe was once a victim, but has actually been involved in that exploitation for a period of time, that the exploiters have seen that they actually can benefit by using them a little bit further high up the chain, and in turn they almost become an offender and start to exploit other peoples on behalf of the wider criminal group. And there's someone's trickle to deal with, because it's that back and forth in your mind, I suppose, as to, well, they were a victim at some point, what should we do with them? Are they someone who needs our support? Are they someone who needs some form of sort of disruption from a sort of a criminal aspect as well? I think the key bit at the bottom of the slide there is vulnerability. Unfortunately, I wish there wasn't any victims, but in an ideal sense, if we're dealing with victims, they're the ones who are trustworthy and will engage with us from the outset. That's not the case. We rarely get that. I'd probably say a very small percentage of people will engage with us, and even those that do, we won't get always a credible account from people, because they will pick the people who are isolated, who have those dependencies to drugs and alcohol, who have got a language difficulty, so they can manipulate a setting and always feed that story to them beforehand, so they've already been prepped, and that they almost feel that they're onto a loser before they even start the process with us. Just things to look out for, guys. I think I appreciate this is Safeguarding Adults, this input today. So the key individuals, I won't go for more. If you can have a bit of a read through the slide there, if you can see it. Obviously, young men and women, if you look at things like county lines, it's a high issue for us at the moment. I'd probably suggest there's a slide in a bit around current criminality across the country, but certainly in Northants, is around the exploitation of young lads for lots of reasons. But actually, that's where we see a lot of risk around that risk of violence. And it's very difficult because it seems to be a steady flow of new victims, and knowing how to do it and actually trying to get engagement with them. I think some of you in the group I know have struggled with that previously. There's a whole manner of things. I think the dependency of something, someone who's vulnerable in any setting, someone who's suffered some form of loss. Financial is always a massive one. If there's a financial risk there, and if you're involved in those where there's that risk, just be forewarned almost that this could lead to something down the line, especially if you think there's a link into that criminal network. And I think the language thing for me, as much as we don't want this to be an input around foreign nationals, it's where we see some of our biggest issues, because I think even talking as a collective now, we would get from body language, but just the way we articulate ourselves and words, if someone was in distress, if there was more to something. And unfortunately, you lose that to such a degree when you're dealing with people who speak a different language or not your first language. So just be probably mindful of a lot more if you're engaging with people where English isn't their first language, just to take the time to really sort of look at those wider factors. I mentioned it there, so that's just a very rough breakdown, guys, as to the types of slavery we've got for the last period. Some domestic servitude, but the main bulk there is around criminal labour and sexual, with criminal being a large hitter, and that will probably come from the county lines exploitation of usually juveniles, but also vulnerable adults. Whether or not it's locally, just within a town setting, quite literally, can you go here, there, drive me around to the local shop even whilst we're doing drug drop-offs, or it could be that wider network of moving people across the country. And just a split there, we're heavier towards the male side currently, both obviously an adult and child, and that's probably again steered by that high level of county lines criminality where we tend to see male victims and offenders.
Okay, yeah, back to me. So now I'm just going to talk about the national referral mechanism. This is all over the internet if you to Google it, because it's part of the government response to modern slavery. And this is very victim focused, and how we can help out victims, that sort of collective we in the UK. So at the moment, the contract is with the Salvation Army, and it's financed by the Home Office, and it basically are safe houses that are dotted around the UK. There's none in Northampton, where there's various sort of advice and support, which I'll come on to in a bit, to help people sort of get out of the situation, but also then move on with their life, and whether that's move on within the UK with their life, or whether that's repatriation back to their own country safely, so they don't get re-trafficked back here or another country, then it is only a very, very good process, and everybody should be sort of encouraged to go down that route. They do offer outreach support as well for people that don't want to go to safe accommodation, because they have some alternative safe accommodation here. And there's about 3 or 4 slides on this, so we'll go through that. You can only refer into the national referral mechanism if you are a first responder. And there's a list of the main ones and a few extra ones in the end. So the local authority is a first responder, so you can refer in. UKVI is UK Visas and Immigration, and all the others are fairly obvious. And then sort of the other people that can do it are non-governmental organisations, but they have to be linked to the slavery sort of side of things, charity-wise. So, for example, because we've had it in Northampton, a female has sort of approached Mind in the town, and sort of stated that she's been exploited. Mind cannot do a national referral. They would contact either the police or, more than likely, the local authority, which they did on this case. Not that it got them anywhere, because nobody knew about it, and it did end up with the police in the end. But it's you would, on that occasion, if they approached you, you would be doing a referral for Mind on that issue. Next one, Nick. It's fairly simple. I don't need to go through it, but it's like doing your car tax to some degree. It's on the government website, and you just put down the details of the person, and then you've got fairly tick boxy areas, and also a free text to explain what the concerns are. And you've just got to bear in mind that, like anything, that's going to land on somebody's desk. They're going to have a look at it to see whether they believe, on a balance of probability, that that person is likely to be a victim of modern slavery or trafficking. And the bar is really quite low, but you need to put plenty of information on there. Next slide, Nick. So when they do, if they do go into accommodation, and they will make arrangements to get you to that accommodation, the Salvation Army have a whole host of volunteer drivers, which they'll send out sort of texts and WhatsApps to if they need to move somebody from Northampton to a safe house in Bradford, let's say. But if you can look on there, that's the sort of things that that's open to them. So that's why I always say, you know, it's only a plus. You know, it's a real good benefit. There may be an initial time delay from when you get a victim presented to you, and we've had it both ways. So if we get, for instance, the chap that turned up at the petrol station, we would undoubtedly have to probably put him in a hotel for 1 or 2 nights until we get the system in place to get him into the national referral mechanism. Likewise, because you've got adults, we have had previous occasions where I've spoken to an adult probably on 2 or 3 occasions, explaining this to them, explaining what their options are, and then they've decided to come out on their own terms when they know it's safe. And on the one that I dealt with, it was the exploiter that was exploiting them, the controller, had actually gone back to the home country for like a long weekend holiday, and at that point they felt comfortable that they could come out. So I always say to my police officers when I'm doing the training, because we obviously come across quite a few of these, it's how you explain it to them, because there will probably be translation issues. Just make sure that you're explaining a very good service in a very safe place and not 45 days in a detention centre, which they may perceive it could be. And at the end, we obviously deal with adults and child. All child victims must be referred. Clearly, children do not go into safe houses, they go into the local authority care, but they must be referred into there. Adult victims, they can only be referred if they give their consent. So they have to consent to going into it and or having outreach support. What happens when you do a modern a referral, national referral mechanism, is that if the abuse is happening in Northamptonshire, a copy of that form will be sent to the local police force. So we will get a copy of that form. That doesn't mean we're suddenly going to take over or get in contact directly with the victim. We will always, and this is not necessarily just for this sort of crime type, but every crime type, but probably more so for this, we will go at the pace the victim wants to go at, and also go with their wishes of what they want to do. And that's again why it causes some problems from an investigative point of view, because if somebody has managed to extricate themselves from a situation that they were not happy with, quite often they do not want to then want to proceed with a criminal investigation, because we've actually solved their problem, which is to help them get out of a situation, and they don't want the added issues and threats and violence and everything like that they perceive may come with it, of then forward going on and making a complaint. So when I talked about David, we took off traveller's site, the guy who was English. He went down to Dover. Within a couple of weeks, they found him a job down there, which was obviously a safe job. And within 3 months, he was standing on his own 2 feet, and he was renting his own accommodation, which again was safe accommodation. And he was, back on track. So it is a very, very good process. Just to go on to that, if you do get victims that approach you because they don't want any police involvement, then I would probably urge you to, well, certainly contact us, and we would speak to them. We're all plainclothes. We would speak to them very informally in a safe location and give them their options at the end of the day to support you, really. We certainly won't force people to make a complaint or force people into investigation.
John, I just noted, I don't apologise, I don't know who sent it through because it disappeared from my screen, but there's a question then around, I think, victims and how many we have that actually go into the setting but then actually fall back out and maybe get re-exploited by either the same or different suspects. John, I don't know your views on that, but I think, in all honesty, we do have that, don't we? We struggle with that with some time. The NRM process isn't great on occasions, in the sense of once victims land a different area, they are still in another area. They can't be sort of looked after 24/7 on occasions, and quite a few times you may find an exploiter tries to track them down. But actually, some of our understanding around OCG groups is they accept that some will almost run and try and evade that exploitation, and it's really a balance then of what else they've got and whether or not they want to spend the resource trying to get people back in. I think that's one of the issues, though, around that control element as to getting people to engage in the first place, because we're aware that there's that psychological control, that fear factor, that thing, sort of ingrained sort of threat of what could happen. That's why we don't get engagement. And we have some success cases where people do sort of completely separate, go into that safeguarding sort of world, and have managed to sort of completely keep a separation. We've also have others who actually actively gone in and then later on down the line actually actively looked to re-engage with their exploiters because they've seen it in their own sort of way as a better life for them. And that's one of the difficulties we face. So John, I don't know if you've got any more views on that.
No, it's very difficult, especially if they're adamant that they want to go home, back to their home country, because we would like to slow that process down in order to make sure it's safe for them to go home. We've certainly dealt with people that were exploited in Gloucester, in Gloucestershire, and they were adamant they wanted to go home, and actually Gloucester police sent them back home fairly quickly and paid for a flight. A lot of that was probably to do with that it was Cheltenham races at the same time, and they had no hotel accommodation for them anywhere near. But then they landed up on our doorstep being exploited again some 3 months later. So we're quite happy for people to go home, but certainly we're dealing with jobs where there's 40, 50 plus victims that we know of that have come from one sort of small town area in Romania, and therefore, what are we actually sending them back to? And a lot of these people, they are poorly educated. They may have vulnerabilities with drink or alcohol and stuff like that. So they are quite challenging to try and explain the best processes with. But the longer they stay in it, the higher the success rate is, I would suggest.
Brilliant. So a slight steer now, guys, but staying on the same aspects really around us trying to, I suppose, make you aware of some of the knock-on impacts of certain types of crime, and where we could really do with a leg up with sort of understanding, I suppose, our current local sort of demographic and what issues we're faced with. So I'll put that image there. I don't know if anyone recognises that, but that is the deaths of 39 Vietnamese nationals who were smuggled into the country back in 2019 down in Kent. I don't know if you hear a lot of the media outlets. And since then, there's been a real push, sort of from the police perspective, certainly, and some of our partners around understanding organised immigration crime, understand the impacts. Historically, the police and immigration were very good at finding someone once they come off the back of a lorry, lock them up, and immigration put them into a detention centre, which to some degree still occurs, and that still has to occur. What we need to start realising and working together on a little bit more is what actually intelligence can be gleaned from these incidents. A lot of the individuals through immigration centres actually sometimes get housed back in the community whilst they wait, or are still active in the community, or actually have come off the back of a lorry, but one in which the police or immigration haven't got in front of, and therefore are in our community and have that wealth of knowledge. And on that front, we're looking to try and understand the network of people involved in that type of offending. It's going to be organised crime groups, most likely, probably an organised crime group overseas, and with that, there's always that element of, well, what can I do to really support that? It's such a widespread issue. But actually, if we were to get into local addresses and spot people who we think are immigrants or potentially have got that knowledge, even those little bits of information of where they travelled through on certain dates, certain ports used, if there's any reference to how they were treated in a lorry, if drivers obviously were aware or not, all those little snippets help sort of develop that intelligence picture, stuff that we can feed into larger operations. So it's one of the reasons me and John want to include this, because you're ultimately going to find that these victims who get through this and aren't sort of stopped by the police or immigration do go on to become probably victims of some form of slavery, because they've wanted to come to the country to better themselves, but ultimately it's taken a wrong turn, because usually when they're here, there's an exploiter at the other end of it who, ultimately tries to convince them of money or puts them into a certain environment that they didn't realise was going to be the case when they travelled to the UK. I mean, there's a slide there just to try and emphasise some of the money that's made by these groups. And there's three individuals. We'll show you images in a second of them. So these are three of the victims or people who died in the back of the lorry. You can see the volume of money being paid on those occasions. So 17 grand or so, an extra 11,000 to finish his journey. When you start sort of tripling up and looking at 39 individuals on that one crossing, and I know a little bit about that job, and on that day there was potentially 2 crossings by that one organised crime group on that occasion. So you're talking vast amounts and thousands of pounds, and there's a lot of maybe risk, we say, but actually is there, or in the sense of they can enter the country fairly easily and are making that much profit. It's something that's going to continue whilst, again, John's mentioned before, whilst the demand's there and people want to come to the UK, there's going to be groups who do exploit them. And something we just want to hit home with it is there are 3 we're just referencing there. As much as, yes, they're breaking they're breaking the rules, they're committing immigration offences, they're young adults who are looking to better their lives in the UK, and ultimately they're still being exploited via that. Even if they're willing participants, they're still being exploited by a wider group and network. So we want to talk about it today, just to try and have it in people's mindsets when they're going into addresses, when they're engaging with people maybe from foreign nationals, just to start to think where they've come from. If we get that information as to when they arrived in the country, who they went through, that sort of thing. I put Operation Nurse on here. This is, to be fair, guys, more to do with child safeguarding, but may obviously impact if you if it cross references any of your departments. But a nurse is our operational response around unoccupied migrant children coming into the country. It sometimes impacts because we have to treat unoccupied children how they portray. So if they say they're 16, 17 or so, they will be treated as a child, even if it turns out they're adults. So you may just have some knowledge later down the line as to this process. So it's a national response. It's a process there to help safeguard and sort of deal with that child from the onset, so we haven't got to go into the custody process, and just maximise safeguarding and sort of information sharing again. I don't think that slide's relevant, guys. That's when we left in for that same bit. John, I think it's over to you now for the last bit around foreign nationals.
Yeah, we're nearly there, guys. I think there's 4 slides to go, with the last one being a few scenarios that you might come across. Foreign national offenders, it's no different to UK offenders. The far majority of people are law-abiding people and want to work hard and support their families, but we do get obviously quite a few foreign national offenders, as we do get UK offenders. Currently going through our custody at the moment is about 30% foreign nationals that go through our custody blocks that have been detained. So that's if you do deal with foreign people, foreign families, then these are just a few things that you can do. So just be quite inquisitive about the ID. I would always take a copy of the ID, whether that's the picture on your phone or something like that, so you've got a reference to it. Probably be a bit more inquisitive if they've got no ID, which we spoke about before, as to why they would have it. Certainly on the continent, it's lawful that you should carry ID with you. Therefore, most foreign nationals would carry ID on them anyway, because that's what they do back in their home countries, because they have to do it by law. And if they've got ID from other countries, that's not the same as their nationality. So things like in order to get into the country, you might find that Albanians have Greek or Italian passports. They may be legitimate, they could well be fake as well. And we can certainly help you out on that if you've got any concerns with that. The police have access to the Interpol, which is 191 countries, but their database where there's wanted people on there. And I've only put that on purely because you may be dealing with something where you get either some information or a comment to say he's wanted back in his home country, or he's been to prison in his home country. And certainly if he's wanted, we can check a database fairly easily to see whether they're currently wanted by another nationality. And then if you've got concerns, then brief interpreters. If you've got suspicions or you're not happy, then perhaps when you go with an interpreter, if you take one with you, then perhaps get them to look out for signs as well and things, and get them to listen for things as well. Certainly when we do unannounced visits on addresses with interpreters or with police officers that can speak the language that the address we're going to, we will not introduce them as interpreters from the outset, because we quite like for them to listen out to see what is said in the first 2 or 3 minutes when we walk through the door. We certainly had a very good success with that Nick dealt with regards to a prostitution brothel concern, where we walked through the door, and I think it may have been Romania, and the person said, tell them I'm not your boss, tell them I'm your customer. But we would never have picked up on that, because obviously that was in Romanian. He's suddenly he subsequently got dealt with for managing prostitution. Okay, and what a lot of people are not aware about, just flip to the next slide first, Nick.
Yeah.
What a lot of people are not aware about, you can obtain the criminal records of people abroad. So ACRO, which is based down in London, they are the UK process in place for processing requests that come in from other European countries or other countries for UK people that may have records. But likewise, you can go into them and obtain a criminal record report of an individual from Europe. Obviously, some countries are better than others at giving us records. Clearly, if you're dealing with a Somali family, you are not going to get a criminal record report from Somalia, because they do not have such a database. But that is something that's open to you. It is we've got an agreement within the police of doing checks, and we will check everybody's criminal record. If they come through custody, then that's an automatic check that we will do, and we do get some interesting results back, because certainly prior to Brexit, there was no requirement for people to apply to come to this country within the EU. They could just walk across the border or come across the channel. So therefore, we have no knowledge of what sort of people we've got in the UK. And we do turn up people that have been stopped for drink driving and find that actually they've spent 15 years in their own country in prison, having murdered somebody, which we come across. So if you do get those concerns, then speak to ACRO. There probably is a fee for you, well, there will be a fee for you to do it, but you can get that check back. And now the last couple of slides. You want to take the top one?
Yeah, I think it was really just to try and put it into some personal context so people could maybe put themselves in the situations where they're most likely to be able to, I suppose, essentially come across slavery and then identify that early on, in the hope that you guys obviously can start thinking more sort of maybe invested minded, or how you can sort of help gather intelligence for us to help build that intelligence picture. So things like examples we've used where we've had it exist. So during a social care visit, spot a number of bank cards and identity documents in various other people's names. You know, I appreciate it's not what you're there for, maybe a visit, but even if we've just got a snippet of that, and that could be shared back to us, that helps present the picture. We may be missing that as a missing key to the puzzle. It's just a great opportunity to maybe do it, and we're not expecting you to start rifling through all the details of that, because it would have been proper to do so, but just that early steer, it might just support something we're working on at the time. Again, housing checks there. If we're doing housing checks, there's other people present who have no obvious association. Again, I've been there before and just not really thought it through, but actually, why are they there? You know, we've had situations where we've got fairly vulnerable sort of 56-year-old adults with a 21-year-old male up from London, and it's just accepted that person's in that address and that information is not fed across. Well, actually, have we got someone being exploited in the setting? Have we got actually the male from London being exploited and dropped off here? It's all stuff we won't know unless we're shared it in the first instance. John, I don't know if there's anything on the next section around the financial support side.
Yeah, just a person working but has very little signs of financial support. We've got masses of warehousing in the county, and they can't fill it for employing people. There's always a demand to employ people. We know that people are being brought across on the promise of a job and accommodation, and that is sort of partly true. They do get a job, they get a legitimate job. They are probably sort of walked to a recruitment agency. We do works with a recruitment agency, but they're probably taken to a recruitment agency to get all the necessary correct paperwork and get the job. They're probably taken to a bank in order to open a bank account, get assistance with that, so they get a bank account. It's then that the issues start coming in, that because they've made those arrangements, they get put into debt. I know that people have come over previously on this sort of circumstances, knowing full well that they're going to be £1,500 in debt, and they're still quite willing to come because they think that would just be like a loan that will get paid off. But unfortunately, the debt never goes away. But that's when we see the signs of like that 19-year-old boy where they take the bank card off them, they help themselves to their wages, and probably are giving them sort of 30 quid a week back to live on. And again, the people are quite submissive of that. They'll carry on with that because they know there's a debt. They could know what the value of that debt is, and they've probably done some simple calculations themselves to say, well, actually, I'll pay that. I'm going to pay that debt off in 6 weeks if we go on at this rate. The trouble is that they never do pay the debt off, and they may have actually, because of their language skills or other vulnerabilities, actually got them to sign for other stuff like loans or council tax arrears or various other things like that.
I think the last one, John, is mindful of time. We've sort of touched on really. It's just, again, foreign nationals, people being unable to provide key information which you'd expect to know, and others speaking on their behalf. We have it a lot with those employment agencies. If people are coming in and you've got meetings with people, just make sure that the person there is someone who seems credible, and we're just comfortable with them. And if we're not, let's try and do what we can to separate and involve ourselves if need be. And I think the last slide, John, is just a bit from yourself, a plug for yourself around how we can share this across.
Yeah, I'll just cover that. I'll just answer Barbara's question, which she's asked, how do the courts use the Act to defend the victim who has committed a crime, saying they were victims of modern slavery? There is a section in the legislation that does protect victims that commit crime. It has to be fairly low-level crime. So perhaps people that are forced to go out shoplifting, forced begging, grow cannabis, as in cannabis cultivation, organised theft. It's those sort of levels. If they are a genuine victim and have been forced to commit that crime, then they are fully protected. However, because it's written down in legislation and it's there to read, a lot of people do try and use it to get out of jail free, saying I'm a victim. And we have had cases where the person is saying he's been a victim, forced to do it. And then when we actually look at other evidence of him, he's down in London with his girlfriend enjoying himself, taking pictures outside Buckingham Palace and various other things like that. So we do generally investigate both sides of it, A, that they're an offender, and A, that they're a victim, and then at the end we'll come to some sort of outcome on it, but they are protected if they are a true victim. Okay, intelligence. Intelligence is basically information. We turn information into intelligence by assessing it and putting some sort of risk assessment around it. It's vitally important. We cannot, as a police force, survive without intelligence. Everything starts with intelligence. If you do risk assessments in your world, everything will start with information, and I would guess that your risk assessments will change as that information changes. So it's always at the beginning, and that's why it's important. And whenever there's an issue, whether that's like the Soham murders going back, or any other inquiries that happens, it's always a breakdown in communication that has caused the problem, or certainly not helped towards the problem anyway, or could have prevented it. So all I would ask for is any intelligence or information that you think is relevant to us. We would love to have it. It matters not how we get it. We would love people to give us more through Crime Stoppers. So if you speak to foreign families and they know what's going on, but they would never ever speak to the police, then point them in the direction of Crime Stoppers. We probably get around about 30 to 40 bits of information through Crime Stoppers a day. I generally process some of that. We have no idea where that comes from. Sometimes you can work it out by how it's written. Not that we need to work it out, but there are no names. It's 100% anonymous. And then there's an email address there that you can email it into us. But just one bit of information. I did a presentation similar to this on Friday to some children's social workers, and a lady dealt with organised immigration crime, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that had come in on the back of a lorry, and it's all about trust and rapport. So she's built a really good trust and rapport with this child, as she does with many of the children. And I said, look, we have a strategy meeting within 24 hours of that child coming off the back of the lorry. But at that point, as with all these victims, they're not going to do a full disclosure within 24 hours. And she says, oh no, we get more information, as we go down. And she told me of one lad that said, oh yeah, actually the lorry driver gave me a sandwich and a drink en route. Well, clearly that lorry driver has committed an offence, because he knows full well that he's bringing people into the country illegally and trafficking people. And he's probably now, I don't know how long ago that, but he could have well have trafficked more people in. As we've seen before, it's high risk at the end of the day.
I think that's it. Thanks all for listening. Apologies for the shaky start and getting it up and running, but are there any questions before we finish?
Yeah, no, nothing for me.
Okay, I'll take silence as there isn't any. Like I said, thanks for listening, guys. I think this recording, it has been recorded, today's input, and we'll share in case there's any colleagues who want to get eyes on it at some point. But please feel free. Me and John are the leads here in Force. We should be fairly contactable for normal channels. So if you need to speak to us about this or got any further questions outside, please feel free to contact us.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.